Hi, this is Outlaw Bookseller and some more reading list rock, and today we're going back to my old favourites, the Stranglers, to discuss a little known literary connection to one of the songs, couple of the songs. And I have to admit that this isn't a tenuous one, but it is an obscure one. For many of us, our first hearing of the Stranglers would have been one of the singles in 1977. And for me, it was No More Heroes, which I bought without ever hearing the band at that point, simply because I liked the title. And it immediately struck a chord. And who can ever forget the opening lines? Whatever happened to Leon Trotsky? He got an ice pick that made his ears burn. And straight away, I only had the vaguest idea who Trotsky was. I knew he was a Russian political figure. I was 14 at the time. And the music and the intelligent lyrics, the dispelling of a notion that we could have heroes anymore in the modern age was really sort of quite something that struck a chord with me, as it did with many of us at that time. So a mention of Trotsky was interesting. And then a few years later, the band made more records. I followed them throughout. And in, I think it was 79, this album, Hugh Cornwell and Robert Williams' Nosferatu, widely regarded as Hugh's first solo album, though of course it has Robert Williams from The Mother's Invention on there as well. And it's a great record, very cold, dead record, or undead, funnily enough, which is full of all sorts of fascinating songs and interesting things, and we know and love it. And there's a song on here called Big Bug, and Cornwell later revealed that this was about a train that Trotsky used to take around the Soviet Union post-revolution. And he was clearly somebody interested in Trotsky, so that was quite interesting. So of course the Stranglers, they get you reading. And what I didn't know at the time was that he had probably read a book about Trotsky, a novel called The Great Prince Died by a writer called Bernard Wolfe. This is what it looks like. Bernard Wolfe is an obscure writer these days, and an interesting one. The Great Prince Died is based on his experiences of working with Trotsky. He was actually Trotsky's bodyguard. He studied psychology at Yale, and he somehow ended up as Trotsky's bodyguard when Trotsky had to flee to Mexico to escape SMERSH, Death to Spies, the Russian organization which really just went out there and assassinated people who had different ideas to Stalin about the revolution. And it was only after Bernard Wolfe left Trotsky's employ that Trotsky was unfortunately assassinated with an ice pick, as in No More Heroes. So that was immediately sort of an interesting thing. And I didn't know about that book until I just came across it one day, secondhand many years ago, and picked it up. So Bernard Wolfe was already known to me because, as anybody who watches the channel knows, I'm a science fiction fan. And Bernard Wolfe these days is best known for this book, Limbo, also known as Limbo 90, which is a science fiction novel published in America in the early 50s. And this is the current UK edition, which is in Gollancz Masterworks, and you can pick this up pretty much any good bookshop or online. And it's kind of a dystopian novel, and the introduction is by a guy called David Pringle, who's a friend of mine, who is a great science fiction critic. And what he says is that in the way that in the UK, the great dystopian novels in 1984 and Brave New World, this should have been the American equivalent, but it never quite got as popular as it should have been. And it posits a future where there's been limited nuclear war, and a character goes to America where there is a movement amongst young men to have their limbs removed to prevent them fighting in wars. There's a lot more to it than that. It's a very big book. It's a very strange book. It's a very interesting book. And Bernard Wolfe had written one science fiction story before that. And there's also another little foreword in here by an American writer called Harlan Ellison, who Hugh Cornwell has mentioned as being an influence of his. And Harlan Ellison was a science fiction, fantasy and crime writer, amongst many other things, very decorated screenwriter. And he was a fan of Wolfe. And it's almost certain, I would say, that Hugh ended up picking this up and discovering Bernard Wolfe either through the Trotsky novel or through this, and I think it's most likely he probably discovered it through this. If I ever bump into him again, I'm going to ask him. So you can get this and read it, so it's very interesting. So okay, that's a tenuous connection to the Stranglers, you might think, but there's actually more to it. We all know and love La Folie, the last UA Liberty album by the band, and we all remember how, you know, that spawned Golden Brown. But there's a track on here called Ain't Nothing to It, which is written in a kind of jive talk, and anybody who would have been reading Strangled at the time will remember that Hugh mentioned being influenced into the way the lyrics were constructed by reading a book called Really the Blues by a jazz clarinetist called Mes Mesro. Now, he was white. The book came out in 1946. It's available in New York Review of Books Classics, and I'm going to show you again what it looks like. Now, interestingly, Really the Blues was co-authored by Bernard Wolfe, or it was at least ghosted by him, even though the book is in Mesro's voice. And Mesro comes across as somebody who's quite full of himself, got quite an attitude. He was revered amongst jazz players, and he was sort of almost regarded as a white Negro. I don't know if you can say that anymore, but I'm saying it anyway, because that would have been the parlance of the time. And, you know, he is sort of very sort of, there's a lot of braggadocio in the book, and he talks about things. And it's quite interesting because, you know, I can see an influence in that book over Miles Davis's autobiography, which there's no holds bars. If you've never read it, read Miles by Miles Davis. Brilliant book. Really the Blues is interesting. I found it a bit irritating because I find him really full of himself. But I have to say, I don't know his musical work. So Hugh based Ain't Nothing to It, the jive talk and that, on the jive talk that Mesro used in Really the Blues. So through Limbo, Really the Blues, and the Trotsky novel based on Wolfe's own ideas and experience with Trotsky, we have this vision of a writer who did lots of different things. And today, if you're a writer and you want to be successful, you do one thing and stick to it. My own feeling is a lot of real writers don't do that. They write about what they like, and they can be really, really interesting. So Bernard Wolfe remains an obscure figure. Limbo 90 or Limbo is worth looking at. You can get, as I say, Really the Blues. So if you're interested in early jazz sort of process, it's worth a look at. So that explains partly the literary inspirations behind Big Bug, as I say, from Nosferatu, and also Ain't Nothing to It from La Folie. And this is my customized copy of La Folie. I'm sure a lot of you will have seen the video I made about how I put together the sleeve for a spare copy of it. If not, check it out. So that's just a brief one today about the Stranglers and one of their lesser known literary influences. There will be more Stranglers to come. The next Stranglers video, I'm probably going to talk about the influence of science fiction on tracks on the early Stranglers albums. Thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and watch out for some Bernard Wolfe. And this is Outlaw Bookseller signing out.